Welcome back to The Chosen Life. I'm your host, The Chosen Lawyer. And today we have a very special guest, a man that I've known personally for over 20 years, author of the book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. You can see it clearly here. And this is Mr. Greg Barnsdale. Greg, welcome to The Chosen Life.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, real pleasure to meet an author on the show. We've had a couple of them before. This is actually a very unique book. It's not a riveting romantic tale. It's not a guide on yoga or meditation. This is practical advice from a funeral and financial insider. So maybe not the sexiest topic in the world, but certainly one that people ignore, but shouldn't ignore in many, many cases. So Greg, first of all, a little background on yourself before we get into the book. Again, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. So now we've known each other again for over 20 years, and we originally met through financial planning, insurance, etc. But you had a very unique occupation before you went into that realm.
Yes, I did. I started out my career as a funeral director, and I worked at that for about 10 or 12 years, and then basically switched over to become a financial advisor.
Gotta ask you about that because first of all, what brought you to the realm of being a funeral director? Like, what inspired you to originally pinpoint that career?
Well, it goes back to my guidance counselor recommending it. I believe back in high school, in grade 13, I had completed a questionnaire, and that's what the results pointed me to. I actually wanted to become a helicopter pilot, but I didn't have enough physics.
Well, that's quite the spectrum of helicopter pilot to funeral director. Now, they say that, we have, with certainty, we have death and taxes. So, as a funeral director, you're always going to be in business. There's always going to be income coming in. So that being said, and doing it for 10 years, I've met people in that industry before, and it seems like it's very often a family industry, generational. People learn the craft and people tend to stay in it. What was your decision to break away from that realm into the world of financial and insurance, etc.?
Well, I did enjoy the industry, and I've gone back to it actually, but I wanted a change. I wanted to experience another type of work that related to the funeral industry, and I had a strong interest in estate planning. So that's why over my career I had really focused in that area.
Interesting. I thought maybe you were a big wrestling fan, and maybe you're a big fan of The Undertaker and his manager Paul Bearer, and you're watching that, you said, hey, that's for me.
No, that's not the case for me.
Did you ever watch them on wrestling though?
A little bit.
I do a wrestling show as well, so that tends to come up quite a bit. And it's funny, a Hall of Fame wrestler and one of the best known, but one that brought certainly attention to the industry, so to speak. And so I can understand from that end of it, planning for people, when you're on that end of the spectrum, you really understand what the process involves, so you can help walk people through when you're now advising them, from your new perspective.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I wanted more of a holistic type of well-rounded approach to be able to guide people through this phase of the last stage of life that quite often confuses a lot of people. A lot of people just don't know what to expect or what needs to be done. So it just seemed to make sense to focus in that area.
So what inspired you to now you've been in this industry now for obviously a number of years, as far as from a planning perspective. Now it's I'm going to guess it's been from the time I've known you, or is it well over 2 decades, would you say?
Well, I've worked in both industries for about I'd say at least 15 years in each.
And so what then inspired you to be able to write a book on the subject matter? When I looked at this book, I thought it was fantastic. First of all, very easy read. It's not 1,000 pages. They really cover off a lot of the spectrum for people so that they can understand from a planning perspective what's involved. You're talking here about communication, will planning, funeral, cremation, burial planning, estate planning, and power of attorneys. You covered off a lot of good topics there in a really easy format to read and understand. The glossary section I thought was excellent, by the way, because we're going to flip back to, we're always going to hear these terms and we're not going to understand what they are. So you providing that glossary is excellent. So tell me, what was the brainchild for the book and how did you put that together for yourself that you're actually going to produce this project?
Well, I've tried a number of things over the years, John. As I said, I've always had a strong interest in helping to inspire people to plan ahead. And I did find that working in the funeral industry and also in the financial planning industry, there were quite a number of, a fair percentage of people that generally just didn't want to talk about these things. I found it frustrating from the standpoint that I felt I could do something better. And that was really the genesis of this book and putting this together to help people. And it's really just meant to be a conversation starter to get people thinking about and talking with their families about what they want to have happen. And then from that, hopefully engage the right people to help them.
There seems to be, as in my field of law, in real estate, I also get into a lot of corporate commercial and wills and estates as well. It's never seems to fail that as far as real estate, somebody has a family member that passed away, did not have a will, somebody that needs to do a real estate transaction. The person is alive, the family member or friend, but they're incapacitated. They did not make a power of attorney ahead of time. And people seem, when they bring up the subject matter, when we discuss it as a lawyer to client, very often they tell me, oh, I don't want to think about that. If I go make my will or power of attorney, I'm going to jinx myself. I'm going to die. I'm going to get injured. So I don't want, I'm too young for that. This is not for me. I hear so many of those conceptions. Is that along the lines of what you hear as well?
It is, yes. There's a lot of superstition that plays into this sort of planning in advance, and you just alluded to it, but I think it's quite prevalent out there, and people need to understand that just because they create a will or do any of this sort of planning or a power of attorney, it doesn't mean that it's going to attract those types of issues into their life.
It's great if people understood that part of it and got to speak to professionals, but it's funny, they only seem to come to the professionals once it's too late, once they actually need it, and then it's not available to, I can't tell you how many times, Greg, somebody's come to me and tell me I need a power of attorney prepared for someone, but they're already in the point of incapacitation. We cannot sign up somebody who's incapacitated. And it's a shame if they would do it ahead of time, and there's a certain checklist that people need to prepare. And I think that's just very, very important in life and general planning. It's just smart planning ahead of time. And these are the kinds of things I understand that you are heavily involved with people. And so producing this book, again, I think was a great idea. It's a really easy format to read and digest. But actually having a brainchild to prepare it versus actually publishing it and getting to the final product, walk us through, like, what is the timeline to do something like this? And what goes into it work-wise? Because, you have a lot of citations and, a lot of commentary. This is not an easy thing to produce, Greg. So, it's one thing to be inspired to do it. It's another one to pull up your sleeves and actually get it done.
You're right, John. It is a lot of work. I leaned on my publisher, Friesen Press, quite a bit. And I had a number of people help me provide feedback as I wrote this. One of the things that was highly recommended that I do is to recruit a number of people from my target market. And I did that for them to provide me feedback as I created the whole manuscript. And they were incredibly helpful. But I basically created the book based on what they felt should go in this book. And they were not financial planners. They were not lawyers. They were not insurance type people. They were just everyday people. Most of them retired, some of them teachers or business coaches, that sort of thing. But it was very helpful. But it took a long time to do this. To give you an idea of the kind of the bigger picture of how long it took me, this whole project took almost a decade to pull together.
Wow, I didn't realize that. I thought maybe it was a couple of years, 10 years. That's a labor of love.
It is. I always knew at some point, John, that I'd be able to merge the experience that I had that I gained from the funeral industry with that from the financial planning industry and create something unique. At one point, I was traveling across Canada teaching financial advisors about the funeral industry, and that went over okay. There was certainly some interest, but it just seemed to me that a well-written book would be the better approach.
If you could walk through our viewers, as far as from a planning perspective, as far as not ignoring your mortality, you could say what are the top 3 mistakes people make? What would you say they are from your experience?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes is putting off this type of planning. You mentioned it a few minutes ago, and that is so true. Too many people feel that it's not going to happen to them. They get busy with life, and we all get busy with life, but we have to step back, and we should step back and plan for what is truly important. And if someone is taken out of the picture because of a death or even a serious disability, well, from a financial planning point of view, that's a critical aspect that could be alleviated through good planning. So that's one of the things that I have seen too often. Another thing is leaving insurance planning and not reviewing it. When I have reviewed insurance plans with people, specifically life insurance, quite often I find that they're underinsured, and that's based on their goals and objectives, not mine.
Okay, and number 3, if there is a number 3?
Number 3, superstition, I guess. A lot of people just get freaked out by these things and just put their hands up and say, I'm not going there. I don't want to talk about it. And I think that's just not a wise thing to do.
Well, we talked off air, and you were very open on yourself, which I really appreciate. You being personal here with me and the viewers, obviously. And you launched this book and talk about not ignoring your own mortality. And as the book is launching, you get your own diagnosis. If you can,
that's right. That's
yes.
right. 2 months after I had published this, John, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Now, the good news is it is very, very unlikely to be cancerous. It will likely need surgery to be removed, and I'm waiting to hear from the next medical specialist about the next steps. So I'm eager to have this surgery completed and behind me, and have my recuperation underway. But yeah, it's apparently with MRIs, more and more brain tumors are being picked up, and I just happen to be in that pool of many more people. But I certainly don't think that myself focusing on this topic over many years has any bearing on this whatsoever.
No, you can't cause it to fruition. But I was going to ask you, very often these things are found by fluke. In your case, how do you doing an MRI for something else, or how was this diagnosis discovered?
I had a ringing in my left ear for the last little while, and apparently when medical professionals, when ear, nose, and throat specialists hear of someone having ringing in one side, they'll recommend an MRI with suspicion that it could be a tumor. And sure enough, that was my case.
I can tell you from a personal experience, I had a tumor in my foot, and took a lot of diagnosis to find it. Went to a few experts, got the whole gamma of different scans done for myself. And, they were kind of shrugging at me. They kept thinking of different things of what it could be, gout or whatever. But it was funny because until I went to the leading person, they actually discovered what it was. And, I didn't know even that it was a tumor until they told me it was a broken piece of bone in my foot that probably had too much bone grew in there, and it broke off and went onto a nerve. And then as I come back afterwards, after a post-op and recovery, as I'm leaving the office, I turn over to the surgeon and I said, out of curiosity, what was it? He goes, oh, it was a tumor. I'm like, really? In my foot? He's, yeah, it was benign. Don't worry about it. It was just like slaking it off. And It's funny because I knew there was something there like my whole life pretty much. And it just, it would come and go a little bit. And they always told me, oh, you're just wearing tight shoes. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So it's, very often, you can have something, you're not aware of it. And unless you know what to ask for and somebody reads it properly, you never know what's lurking in your body. And that's where I was gonna mention to you, when you're doing a financial plan, you're obtaining insurance, for example, for somebody, sure, a lot better to know about, when you are healthy versus after the diagnosis, because they're not that quick to insure you afterwards, are they?
That's very true. The best type of insurance that anyone can buy, John, is the type of insurance where full medical underwriting is done up front, which is far different from what we see in the television commercials of the easy to buy insurance, even for those whose health is questionable, or they are up in age. But you're exactly right. Myself, as an example, right now, because of these medical tests that I'm undergoing, I'm basically uninsurable. So all of the insurance plans that I have bought in the past, I was very fortunate to have bought them in the past, that I now have them. I just keep paying the premium. They don't come back and basically ask any further questions about your health, because I've already applied for them and been approved.
Well, I gotta tell you, because I've met enough people in my industry, as far as transactional wills, etc., that when they get any kind of diagnosis, they sulk, they go in the corner, feel sorry for themselves, isolate themselves, fall into depression. And I got to commend you because, knowing you for as long as I have, you're stronger willed than ever. And to inspire others, going through their any kind of ailments they are, how do you find that strength, Greg? Like, what inspires you to keep going forward and as strong as you are?
Well, I've got a lot of work to do. I don't have time for a pity party, to be honest with you, John. I really want to share this message with a lot of people, and it is getting some traction. People are starting to take notice, and I'm reaching out to some fairly significant organizations. So I'm quite excited about what the future holds with this message of mine. And as you said a few minutes ago, it is a bit of a labor of love. It's kind of I guess maybe not a mainstream labor of love, I guess, but I do feel it's very important, and I hope to make a big difference.
That's really, I've mentioned this on the show quite a bit, and a lot of the guests we have on, as far as their message goes, it seems to be a common denominator. People work hard, are inspired, and want to make their best life for themselves, their chosen life, and to leave a legacy, to inspire others so they can follow and find their paths as well. So hearing your message, I certainly hope inspires others to find their roles and their roads in life, certainly. And again, I commend you for taking the time, being able to do the interviews that you're doing, given the nature of the surgery. Now, have they walked you through as far as the timeline on the surgery and what will be your state from there as far as time and then recovery, etc.?
No, not as of yet. My wife and I are eagerly waiting a call from the next specialist, and that could be coming any day now. So I would imagine the surgery could take place anywhere from a couple of weeks down the road to 2 or 3 months. I really don't know at this point.
Now, the website is do not ignore right?
Yes,
Do
yes,
not
correct.
ignore yourmortality.com. You're going to have a news update section on there where people can follow as far as what's happening in your events. And as far as organizations and people that are interested in the book and being able to supply the book to either the groups or members, etc., like how can they go about reaching you that way?
Yes, on that website, do not ignore your mortality.com. People can order the book directly from there. The book is available on all physical and electronic platforms. And there's also a 1 tip a month option where people can sign up for an engaging tip from myself monthly. And it's just a brief tip, but the intention, as I share on my website, John, is to help people become engaged with this and actually take action instead of reading the book as an example and then forgetting about it and not doing anything. I don't want people to do that. I'd rather people keep the momentum going. And if they need a brief email from me once a month to help inspire them to get moving with it, I think that could be helpful, and people are signing up for that.
That's wonderful to hear. And Greg, I got to ask you, when you wrote the book and now that it's launched, who is the target audience in mind? Who is the expected reader of the book, and where are they able to obtain the book?
Well, my target audience, this book is written for the Canadian and the American audience, John. But
Wonderful.
really, I had been thinking age 50 and over, which is a pretty wide audience. But really, it's for younger ages too. Even as I'm sure you've instructed and guided your clients, even if they're younger, uh, they should also be thinking about a will. So my target audience, I had narrowed it down to age 40 and over. And in
Interesting. Yeah.
regards to buying the book, people can buy it directly off the website or even off Amazon or Barnes and Noble if they wish.
Wonderful. So it's available online, it's available on the site as well. And I would say if you own property, especially real estate, it's something to think about: wills, power of attorneys. If you have children, certainly. And I always tell people, don't think so much about age, think about life circumstances as well. And, people like to think, they're going to live forever, and that'd be great, but that's not realistic. And I always tell people, think about your worst case scenario. And if something, God forbid, happens to you, who's left behind? Who's going to make those decisions? What are they going to do? And the more you could set that up for them ahead of time, you could take a lot of pain and trouble out of their hands if you can pre-plan for them, certainly.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's great advice, John.
I could tell you, I've seen people that passed away suddenly in their 40s, and you got the survivors, no insurance, no money to speak of, and people left with a lot of expenses and heartache. Um, I've seen people as far as not planning well, and as far as then having to sell their real estate property because they didn't plan as far as the mortgage and who would cover it. So there's a lot of scenarios where people have to think, especially if you're dependent on somebody for an income, or as a spouse, a partner, parent, even child sometimes, you got to kind of configure that and figure out, God forbid, if something happens to me, who depends on me, and how can I set them up so that I can make their lives easier and not more difficult if, God forbid, something happens to me, whether I pass away or I get sick, disabled, etc.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the other important things too, John, as you're well aware, is a will, a valid will is the only way to specify who you want in charge to wrap up your life. That's a pretty big job.
I've seen so many painful times, Greg, where you have a will, and it's very often parents and one surviving parent, and they have children, and they make one person, one sibling to make the decision, then make all the siblings together make the decisions. But it's even harder when there is no will, and then they can't agree on who's going to be the decision maker, and you have to file forms with the court, you have to give notice, people can dispute it. It can be a gong show. And so the more you can avoid family members fighting, which is not easy, at least if it's in writing and it's set up ahead of time, there's less disputes over it, certainly. Because Greg, I've seen so many times an estate that's not well planned is a death sentence as far as relationships go.
Yes, I agree.
So as far as today and wrapping up today's episode, Greg, you've been so great as far as, sharing your story and sharing the time. And again, I heavily recommend to people, please check out this book, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality. Just a fantastic read as far as planning for yourself, understanding the process. And, you walk away after reading this, I'm not gonna say you feel uplifted and want to go sit on the beach, but you feel like you take uncertainty out of your mind. Instead of worrying about what could be, and am I doing all the steps, this gives you a really good starting point in getting your affairs in order so you can sleep better at night saying, you know what, I've taken care of business. So in wrapping up today's episode, I would ask you, as far as inspirational messages to the viewers from your experience, both, as a funeral director, then as an insurance broker, financial planning, what messages of hope and inspiration can we give the viewers today?
Well, I can wrap it up briefly, John, in something that just passed through my mind. And those words are simply this: to plan while you can.
Plan while you can. For those of you that are listening to us today and saying, you know what, I've been thinking about getting that will done. I thought about getting that power of attorney. Do I need insurance? Where's my finances at? Plan while you can. Get off your duff, make a to-do list, start making those calls tomorrow. Because I can tell you, Greg, it's and I can certainly speak again, when life hands you lemons, so to speak. But I can tell you, when I was barely able to walk and I felt my foot like that, and it was like for months. It's amazing when God takes away your right foot, all of a sudden, how much you're dependent on it and how much life changes, and then how grateful you are when you get it back. So certainly, I wish you well on the surgery. It's going to go successfully. You're going to have a quick recovery, stronger than ever. And it's great that you're able to share your message and your experiences with the audience. Because certainly people listening in, this could easily happen. This could happen to any of us. We don't know. So plan while you can.
Thank you, John.
Greg Barnsdale, a pleasure, my friend. And I'll again let people know, do not ignore your mortality.com to check out your website. And thank you again for your time, Greg. And we'll see you back on The Chosen Life.
Thank you.